Hello everyone! Saturday saw the announced a few weeks in advance and anticipated Ask Me Anything event organized by several major subreddits more or less associated with the topics of UFOs or UAPs and non-human intelligence. In this video I would like to provide an overview of the questions and answers that followed. A brief note concerning the panelists first. Leslie Kean is a veteran journalist, a person who was instrumental in the groundbreaking story concerning UAPs published by the New York Times in December 2017, with 3 declassified UFO videos provided by Lou Elizondo and Christopher Mellon. Next we had Dr. Hal Puthoff, a physicist with career spanning several decades and involved in cutting-edge, unfortunately mostly classified, projects dedicated to theoretical physics and advanced propulsion systems. Dr. Garry Nolan is a distinguished scientist from the Stanford University, a 2022 Nobel Prize nominee, and the person behind novel gene-based therapies, including cancer therapies. Dr. Segala works at the Institute for Advanced Studies at Austin, Texas. His groundbreaking experiments covered the fields of radiobiology, quantum entanglement, quantum optics, and neurobiology. He was the lead scientist on the anomalous phenomenon study team. The whole event started with Garry Nolan signing up to the efforts of a whistleblower team led by Jake Barber, about whom I talked in the last video, the newly coming alleged first-hand witness to a UFO retrieval operation in the role of a scientist. Hal Puthoff confirmed his involvement with Bigelow Aerospace and their participation in programs related to anomalous craft. Studies involved space-time engineering, injuries resulting from contact with anomalous craft, and so on. He touched upon the topic of pilots reporting maneuvers which are impossible to explain, providing an explanation according to which time inside the UAP flies much faster within its internal bubble compared to the outside, explaining both the bizarre behavior and the fact that the occupants inside do not get squashed, as well as different craft sizes observed inside and outside. By applying the treatment of Maxwell equations to Einstein's general relativity theory, the behavior of the anomalous craft suddenly starts to make sense, by engineering spacetime on a local scale. We apparently know how it possibly works, but we fail to replicate the capability due to material limitations at this time. Puthoff was in touch with officials digging into whether a legacy UFO crash and retrieval program exists, and he confirmed it via those people, in line with the testimony of David Grush provided before the US Congress in 2023. He also mentioned that the difficulty in digging into said programs, accessing materials from retrieved craft, is enormous due to the compartmentalization and the time range covered by the program. He did confirm that the bismuth magnesium alloy that was used in this craft was exotic in terms of its properties. There would be more results which as such are not classified, but the instrumentation used to obtain the results is. The extraterrestrial source of these materials was not confirmed, but the material itself, which should not bond into a cohesive material based on its composition, was still amazing. And the material was possibly obtained from the famous Roswell crash of 1947. Next came up the ultra-terrestrial hypothesis, i.e. the other intelligent beings residing alongside us here on Earth, whether in the so-called shadow biome or biosphere, for example underground, or otherwise. This option would also be in lockstep with the ideas like underwater bases or even interdimensional presence around us. As a side note, Hal sported a painting made by Ingo Swann on his wall, one of the best purported remote viewers collaborating with the 3-letter agencies in the US. Hal confirmed the existence of other materials than those published and acknowledged as portraying anomalous objects, which are very likely to be real. The option of declassifying high-resolution videos of anomalous craft was also mentioned as a possibility and hope, with the sensitive data removed, of course. The technology of zero-point energy was mentioned, but so far the attempts have apparently been unsuccessful. Leslie Kean asked Hal about his own ontological shock. He mentioned the realization of where the boundary of what is alive and what is not lies. His mention included plants connected to a polygraph machine and yielding responses, thus resulting in the possibility of plants having some form of sentience we may currently be unaware of. This also tied into studies on remote manipulation of matter with mind, like raising and decreasing temperature by the already mentioned Ingo Swann, with the effects measured using quantum level sensitive equipment, as perfectly shielded from the environment as possible. The last question involved Dr. James Lakatsky, also involved in alleged crashed retrieval and reverse engineering operations, and his theory that the UAP craft do not have or use energy source on board, but rather use existing flows of energy present in the surroundings, tapping into them as a kayak on a river. A possibility of a mothership remotely powering such craft was also mentioned here, as well as psychokinesis, so providing the energy source and the control system by the pilots. Dr. Jim Segala was up next. Jim is a specialist in tests and experiments, some of which involve multiple level sensors intended to detect UAPs. Asked what he would do with free access to funds and no non-disclosure agreements, he would be interested in the interaction between the UAP craft and the human body, and how the body can be influenced by the anomalous objects. He would be interested in studying experiencers and figuring out why they experience what they do. The topic of brain-UAP connection, also involving Garry Nolan, was mentioned. This included related effects, such as the famous Havana syndrome, i.e. the impact of various kinds of electromagnetic radiation on the human brain and mind. There seem to be similarities between UFO experiencers and victims of the Havana syndrome in terms of their physiological reactions. Information transmission using X-rays and gamma rays was mentioned, with such phenomena being possibly observed at the infamous Skinwalker Ranch in Utah. Sadly, we are really limited with what our sensors can read. A good question, going back to physiology, regarded potential experimental protocols which could differentiate external impact from internal influences. The answer to this was not too easy, as again we hit the sensor limitations, but this is what we can rely upon nonetheless, at least at this time. Garry Nolan was up next, featuring his furry animal friend in the background. The topic of preparing people for disclosure via the nuts and bolts phenomenon and dropping the famous woo on them was mentioned, including how much this is an issue because of possible societal collapse and current control structures. Garry mentioned, very much in line with my own view, that the nuts and bolts part of the phenomenon is something science is at least partially ready to face and engage with, while the more metaphysical side of the phenomenon is simply extremely difficult to grasp, as we have very little in terms of both protocols and equipments, which could be reliably used to study it. Here, Garry also underlined the importance of public involvement and various initiatives starting up from the grassroots, as well as the fact that they contribute as much to certain aspects of the phenomenon as governmental sources. A question about the hair sample with a possible tall, white Nordic non-human being which was studied in the 1990s in Australia was mentioned, and whether Garry would be willing to study it as a possible proof of genetic manipulation. He pointed out that he is not the best person to do this, but the idea as such is also limited by the costs, with the same applying to studies on the Nazca bodies, for example. The fact that disclosure could undermine the scientific authority by uprooting the already present status quo was touched upon, with the notion that indeed some adjustments would be necessary and there would be pushback from parts of the scientific community. But then again, science is flexible and would likely adjust to the new paradigm. A question regarding the best possible medical benefits for humanity from the non-human tech followed. Mental disorders were mentioned as one of the areas, as well as possible hybridization of species and whether we would be able to tell if there are people with non-human genetics walking among us. The other areas involved immune system, including its involvement with cancer and battling it. The interrelation between neuroplasticity of the brain, the natural susceptibility to certain phenomena and damage we suffer, and how the body is able to bypass it and form new connections, some of which also latch onto anomalous phenomena, including telepathy and its relation with autism, were also a topic here. This was related to how blind people are still able to remote view distant locations, for example. The role of caudate putamen, a structure in the brain, was mentioned. It seems to process data from the environment and motion, and seems to be the connection point between us and anomalous phenomena. The question of unlocking its latent capacity was asked. The possibility of transcranial stimulation of that part of the brain is apparently currently being studied and analyzed. The notion of people being able to summon orbs of light was talked about, similar to what Chris Bledsoe's experience was, and how they differ from the more classical UAPs. Garry mentioned that they seem to have awareness and are able to pass through matter, according to the reports about the orbs. He also mentioned this as a thing which may be a part of remote study on the planet and our species. Jim Segala was asked here if he knows people able to summon such forms as orbs. He did mention that some people are able to tap into some currents that provide the ability to filter through information from unusual sources. Leslie Kean was the last panel member to answer questions. She was asked about the relationship between the paranormal and the UAP. She said that a massive overlap exists here, but she is unsure as to what it exactly is. The connection between the phenomenon, the paranormal, and what consciousness is, and what happens to us after death and in near-death experiences was mentioned. The panelists talked about the stigma carried by experiencers and how to mitigate it in the future. The importance of experiencers coming forward and being treated fairly was pointed out as an important factor here. Mediumship and similar phenomena were also covered, as well as the fact that people with near-death experiences not only see dead people, but often also who seem to be the grey aliens during their experiences. So, that would be the summary of the AMA event. As usual, the opinions here vary. Some people say it was very interesting, some are miffed by the fact that there was not enough information presented. Personally, I am glad with how it went and with the provided content and the discussions. Maybe Hal Puthoff could answer more questions, but I also understand why he did not. His hands are largely tied, if not for his own sake and safety, then for that of his family, I believe. And what do you think, dear viewers? Have you watched the event? If so, have you enjoyed it? Let me know in the comment section down below. We are still in the month of January, the month hyped up to be crucial on the path to eventual disclosure of non-human life. Therefore, there may be more coverage of current news than usual. Stay tuned. Thank you for watching, like and subscribe if you enjoyed the content, and I will see you soon in the next video. Take care.